You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network.
Hi, this is Jim Shooter, and you're listening to the Epic Marvel Podcast.
Hello, welcome back to the Epic Marvel Podcast. This is the Eternals, episode 1A, covering a period of the Eternals from 1976 to 1977. I am your host, Kurtis Findley.
And I am your Eternals co-host, Eric Findley.
And I'm also co-hosting, it's Craig.
So we have two co-hosts today. The Eternals is such a big concept that I thought we should have more than just two co-hosts today. So Eric and Craig, you are no strangers to this show. You've been on many of my episodes before. Eric, you've been on Fantastic Four and Ant-Man and Moon Knight.
Moon Knight, yep.
Craig, you've been on Silver Surfer and Thor.
And Doctor Strange.
And Doctor Strange. Wow, okay. Man, we got to get back to some of these episodes. It's been a long time since we revisited any of those characters.
But it's going to be a good time to do it, too, because a lot of those, I think, will overlap at different points with aspects of the Eternals, since it's bouncing around the cosmic Marvel universe.
That's very true. In fact, I haven't pitched this to you guys yet, but after we finish going through this book, the follow-up book that ties up a lot of the loose ends is in Thor. So we should probably do a Thor episode shortly after we tackle this one here. But we're talking today about Jack Kirby's Eternals. Now, I have to be honest, I've never really cared for the Eternals before today. Really. Like, historically,
At this moment, you started caring.
Just because I'm here in the room with you two. No, it's just that I've never read these original issues, and anytime they popped up in whatever small corner of the Marvel Universe, which is not often, I just, maybe because I didn't know the story, I never connected with the characters.
Actually, one of them has popped up significantly.
True. Yes, that's true. And we'll talk about her in a little while.
Yeah. My exposure to the Eternals has been this one character you're talking about was on the Avengers.
Sersi. We can
She was the leader of the Avengers for a while, and that was sort of a period that I really liked because I was a big fan of Thunderstrike, a big fan of Black Knight, and so when she was on the Avengers, like I kind of knew her a little bit. But same thing where the Eternals as a whole, it's like you kind of know about them, but they've always been so lore heavy that it's hard to get into them.
Oh man, yeah.
And I've gotten into them more recently with the newer miniseries that they've had in the last couple of years. But yeah, it's tough sometimes to read them.
The Gaiman Romita series was the first one that I really had like exposure to this group of characters, and I'm wondering how much of that is going to influence the movie versus this rather mythologically heavy, as Eric was saying, sort of weighted down a bit mythos created by Kirby that also wasn't it's quite dense.
Very, very dense. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, and even in these 10 issues, there's already so much that so many questions that he raises and just things that I'm sure he's planning on fleshing out later in the back half of these issues. Oh, so I do want to say we are going to only tackle half of this book in this episode, and we'll tackle the other half of this book in the next episode. We are following the Eternals by Jack Kirby Complete Collection, which collects all 19 issues plus the annual of the original series, but we are going to talk about issues 1 through 10 today. This is Kirby's return to Marvel. So I think some of this history is really important to know going into this book, because I think it influences a lot of the decision making that he makes in terms of the characters he's choosing and the way he's telling his story. Now, he had a falling out, of course, with Stan Lee in the 60s, and he left Marvel for DC, and he went to DC and created a lot of new characters and new concepts, such as Omak, the Omak character, and
the New Gods.
Commandy. But yeah, the New Gods is the big one, and I left that for last because that's the most relevant to this. The whole concept of the fourth world, and we're going to come up with that number 4th in these comics as well. But the Fourth World, the New Gods, the Forever People, and Mr. Miracle, all of that, it was his creation at DC.
It's interesting to me too because what he did at DC was very similar to this, but it seems to have had a much more lasting or profound effect on the whole DC universe. Darkseid, for example, is from that creation. So even though DC had been around for decades prior, he influenced it greatly, and then he came back to Marvel and created
even Mr. Miracle has been on JLI.
Big Barda.
Right? Big Barda has been on Orion.
Metron.
Yeah, they've all been around on the big teams.
Those are all characters that have persisted through time and continually get new series and new miniseries or guest spots on teams or whatever. Whereas, the Eternals, other than Sersi, it's like the Eternals stay separate.
Sersi also wasn't his creation, though. It's often forgotten that she actually shows up. The character shows up for like 3 pages in Venus, like a decade prior.
I didn't know that.
Venus, is that the Timely Comics era, before
in the
Marvel?
Timely Comics, but they make reference to in the Eternals. They make reference to that and talk about how humans couldn't spell her name, and that's the reference to her appearance in the Timely Comics Venus series previously.
Okay, interesting.
She helps using her molecule power. She helps make ugly women less ugly, so that they can find husbands.
Oh, the 50s. Okay, so I want to read a little excerpt from Marvel Comics: The Untold Story by Sean Howe. It says, in California, Jack Kirby was miserable. After a promising start, his relationship with DC had quickly turned sour. Shortly after he signed with the company, its sales had ceded first place to Marvel in an industry that was failing. The comics that made up Kirby's mythological Fourth World universe, New Gods, The Forever People, and Mr. Miracle, were cancelled. Kirby's stilted dialogue met resistance, his rendering of Superman was repeatedly corrected to match DC's house style, and his non-superhero concepts failed to impress editors.
I know this isn't a DC podcast, but as a person who just absolutely loves Superman, I really wish I could see a true Kirby Superman unedited.
Well, you actually can. If you buy any of those trade paperbacks or the omnibus that has that Fourth World material, they have bonus material at the back that shows the unedited faces, and it looks like a very typical Kirby face with the flat nose and the huge brow.
No, but it's not actually part of I know you can see the sketches and everything, but just to see it in full glory, if they'd put out the full issue.
Yeah, true. Okay, it says Kirby knew there was still a home for him at Marvel, and Stan Lee had made that clear in interviews. He said, "We never had a fight," but I don't know how true that actually was.
I think Stan says that about his relationship with a lot of the artists.
Yeah. He says, we got along beautifully. I have the utmost respect for his ability, and I wish he'd come back. So anyway, he eventually does come back, and listen to this. Kirby's 3-year contract with Marvel here called him to produce 13 pages a week at a rate of $1,100 a week, or $57,200 a year, which works itself out to $85 per page, which was a really big rate. He declined to revisit Fantastic Four or Thor or any of the titles he created with Lee. Instead, he would take back Captain America as a sole writer, artist, and editor. He'd do an adaptation of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he'd introduce a new creation, yet another ancient secret of alien visitors concept, the Eternals. He's doing 3 titles, 3 monthly titles. Actually, I don't think that they're all monthly. I think one of them, Captain America, was monthly. Can you check to see if Eternals was monthly?
Eternals was monthly.
Okay, so he was still pumping out a ton of stuff. 13 pages a week is insane. I think that's pretty incredible. And if you look at the bonus art in the back here, we have pencil sketches from Kirby of from some of these pages that are before inked, and you can see that he blacks in every single one of the blacks. He doesn't just do rough layouts. He doesn't leave things up for the inker to interpret. He does every single detail. Kirby was a workhorse, and it's just incredible.
Just on that $85, the current page rate at Marvel is only $180. So it's only slightly more than double now if you consider the rate of inflation.
Inflation, right? Yeah. So I just wanted to read that clip because it's good to understand where Kirby was at here. He's starting fresh again for the second time, and there's another quote in this book where Jerry Conway says, "Once Jack came in, the attitude Stan had was, if Jack wants to be his own boss, that's what he's going to be. Just leave him to himself." And so that was Jack's own corner. Now, I've read Kirby's Fourth World. Actually, I haven't read the whole thing because I actually got bored halfway through it and stopped reading because it is so incredibly dense. And the one thing I thought was, man, Kirby could really have used an editor to kind of rein him in just a little bit. I think it didn't help that he was trying to do 4 books at once that all tied into the same big story. That kind of hurt it a little bit. And so with Eternals, I thought while he's doing the same kind of concept, it was a breath of fresh air because it was only one title. And I think he scaled it back just a little bit.
I wonder how much of that, though, was because he sort of had a chance to reflect on what did and didn't work the first time. Because there's a lot of comparables between the Eternals and Fourth World. It is, cosmic, all-powerful beings visiting Earth. It is a conflict between their sort of these
the different
cosmic beings,
hierarchies.
and also and then their like lesser creations. And I mean, there's a lot of similarities you can see as you go through even design pieces. And so I wonder how much of that was things where Kirby was able to stop and say, okay, like this maybe didn't work, and I need to streamline this, or that I need to polish this up a bit.
Yeah.
But even if it is streamlined a little bit, or it's easier to read, I still found it challenging at times because there's so much narration. Like every panel almost has a text box at the top of it, just detailing what's going on. And sometimes it's like, it'd be nice if this just was,
Definitely
the characters talking.
And it shows he still didn't have an editor, and he was doing and that's what Kirby does. Like he's just a very verbose storyteller in that sense. So yeah, you have to be able to get past that. Now, I did ask a bunch of people online to see what their thoughts on the Eternals happened to be, if they liked it or if they didn't like it. So I have some comments here. Mr. Reese says, I really wanted to like this, but I found it pretty tedious. While there are a lot of interesting elements and some interesting characters, this doesn't really translate into a compelling story, which I found meandering and slightly anticlimactic. Now, we haven't reached the climax yet, so we can't comment on that. But it does get a little meandering, I thought, even toward the end of what we read here.
Yeah, I felt the same thing. There are some places where I'm like, oh, that's an interesting twist to the story. And it's not really a twist, it's just it was heading one direction and then it just sort of like is doing something different.
Some of the twists, as you say, I thought were a bit unearned.
Yeah.
I thought visually compelling, and I would love to see it rescripted. Like
yes, yeah. Oh no, that'd be great.
So yeah, that's a lot of the
not abandoning Kirby altogether, but like you said, have someone come in and edit it down for them.
So Cody is Rodeo says the art is amazing. Story kind of dwindles in quality as it goes along. It feels like all his New Gods, Mr. Miracle, and DC stuff was a lot better. That had an odd ending too, with additional trades, etc., but was longer and solid for a longer length of time.
Probably because he had an editor.
I don't think he had an editor for that
DC?
one as well.
Okay.
I think he was pretty much on his own for that too. Like once you reach Jack Kirby status in the 70s there, like you get to call the shots.
I don't think there's I guess what Jim Lee would be the closest comparable today. And
yeah, that could be. Or like maybe Jonathan Hickman these days could be getting up there a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, but then he doesn't control his visuals. He's still not, like, he doesn't have full control of
True,
it.
that's right.
Like Kirby was.
Yeah, so in that sense, yeah, Jim Lee as a writer and artist, like Todd McFarlane could probably be, but he's not from
Yes,
Marvel.
I imagine if Todd McFarlane phoned up Marvel and said, give me back Spider-Man, they would hand it over.
Yes.
And then also pay no attention to what he's doing, as long as the sales were there.
Okay, Billy Delicious says, it was awesome. I did read this before I read The Fourth World, and obviously there are some very similar concepts, but again, it was still awesome. The artwork alone is breathtaking and makes it worth a read. Evan Bevins says, I met the Eternals in issue 15, bought it as a kid in a flea market just because of the Hulk on the cover. Turned out it wasn't the real Hulk, but the issue, that's a spoiler alert, but the issue where Ikaris and Sersi battle the cosmic-powered Hulkbot was great. Read the full run this year, and that issue was the highlight.
A little bit of side trivia there. That cosmic Hulk robot was standout enough to get itself a HeroClix figure.
Really?
Did the Eternals ever get themselves HeroClix figures?
I don't know. There may have been.
So the only thing from the Eternals series to make it into the HeroClix canon was the Hulkbot, is what you're telling me.
I've
Not
missed
even
a few
Sersi, who was on the Avengers.
I've missed a few of the newer sets, but I don't know. I don't think so.
Wilco says, I was so excited with the first couple of issues as a kid in 1976 and thought that this was really going to be something. A big idea from Jack based on something that interested me at the time. Totally lost me after that stage. Needed Stan to guide it to long-term greatness. I'm not sure people would agree with that comment about Stan necessarily, but...
or that it ever achieved long-term greatness.
Right.
Oh, they did. A couple of them did in the Mighty Thor set, which was after I stopped buying them.
Can I assume it's Toad and
Crow.
yeah.
You can assume whatever you want.
Surely there are some celestial hero clicks.
I don't think so.
Yes, Zirin the Tester, the big one.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah,
I did this. Okay.
Eric says, Eric Knock and Know All, it says, I thought it started out great and then completely lost its way. Dano Cosmic says, Jack Kirby's grandness was on full display with these giant concepts chock full of new characters and personalities, and oh my, the Celestials. Oh yes, oh yes.
I wonder, just listening to some of these comments, I wonder if the way you respond or the way that you enjoy Eternals is affected by whether you read it before or after the Fourth World. Like if that, because it would seem as a more original concept if you hadn't yet read the Fourth World, and so then the Fourth World would come off as sort of more of the knockoff piece, even though it came first when it just in the order of if you're experiencing it.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I read the Fourth World first, and didn't enjoy that. Would that influence whether or not I like this? Would I like? Should I have liked this more because I didn't like that other one?
I don't know, but I mean, there's no way for you to know the other side because you can't unread the first one to read this first,
that's right?
Like it's
very true. Okay, a couple more. This one, Mr. Raven says, Kirby makes it great. Bill says, I never cared for the Eternals. Sersi was okay in the Avengers, though hardly one of the most memorable members of the team. Makari was fun as Quasar's pal/pseudo sidekick, but that's about it for me. And Alan says, I loved it, though it was only recently that I sat down and read it all the way through properly. I have to say it is an enjoyable series, but one that perfectly highlights why Jack needed someone to write scripts for his plot/ideas and dialogue at all.
There you go.
Some of his scripting needs knocking into shape a bit. He was brilliant for concepts and big ideas, but as he goes along, more and more characters get introduced, some fall by the wayside, unintended, I guess, and a lot of plotting and story doesn't get resolved.
I don't know if they fell by the wayside unintended. I mean, if you remember, he didn't get to see this book through, so we don't know what he'd planned to do, bringing those characters back in or referencing back to them later. So
that's true.
They sort of fell by the wayside because the whole book eventually falls by the wayside.
Yeah. Alistair says, I haven't read it in years, but never warmed to the stories or the characters. Paul says, only read it recently, and I loved it, but it was my first exposure to the characters. It is flawed, characters not always rounded enough, scripts a little clunky and old-fashioned, but it has an irresistible charm to it. The Marvel Universe became more interesting from the gods and races, likewise Inhumans beyond just superheroes. His character designs are incredible, and Celestials every bit as iconic as Galactus. It's probably the best and most lasting of his 70s work returning to Marvel. And I would agree with that, because his other work includes a silly run on Black Panther.
Machine Man.
Machine Man, which he's not a really memorable character.
He shows up from time to time, but usually with somebody else.
Yeah,
like he's rarely just him on his own or getting his own title or something, right?
And the other one is Devil Dinosaur, who seems to actually, like, Devil Dinosaur is actually getting his own TV show in a little while.
Didn't he do a bit of Captain America?
And he did a Captain America, but that run I don't think is, it's not one of the most talked about, highly regarded runs of Captain America, that's for sure. Okay, one more. We have a lot of comments. A lot of people wanted to chime in on this one here. This is Ben. Ben says, collected them all in the early 80s when they were easy to find in quarter bins. That tells you something right there.
Won't find that anymore.
Yeah. Kirby was connected with the previous decade's zeitgeist for alien visitors in ancient times, Chariot of the Gods, adding to it his usual mishmash of super people fighting a secret war. Favorite characters: Sersi, Reject, and Carcass. Loved Kirby's single and double page spreads showing the size and scope of the Celestials.
Sorry, who was that coming from? Because I fully agree with them. That was the highlight of this series for me, was those, like, on the third, fourth pages where you have those massive double page splashes. That was just
this is Ben Toon.
Well, Ben, you're a genius.
He continues, when the initial series ended, Marvel tied up the loose threads in Thor 283 to 300 after officially adding them into the 616 universe in Thor Annual number 7. Thank goodness we didn't have to wait the full 50 years for Arisham's judgment. Okay, Andrew says it was okay, kind of wish he'd focus on more of the actual Eternals and kind of meandered in the middle and then had a rushed conclusion. And then final comment, thanks for keeping up with all these comments, all you listeners. Last comment is from Bruno. He says, don't like. Thanks for that comment. I wish you would have fleshed it out a little bit more, but good to know that he didn't like it. Okay, it's time to move on to the actual content here. Just before we start, though, I do want to say that this episode is sponsored by Dying Breed Collectors, and if you would like to purchase any Epic collection from them, you can use the code Epic Marvel Podcast and get an extra 10% off. If you want to order the Eternals Complete Collection that we're talking about today for the month of November, you can get it for 15% off if you enter the code Epic Marvel Podcast. So take advantage of those great deals and its excellent shipping. Dying Breed Collectors, dyingbreedcollectors.com. Okay, let's start with issue number 1. Does anyone want to introduce this one?
Sure. Issue 1 was an interesting one to me. It really was dense. It was like Kirby was trying to pack the 15 years of the Marvel Universe that the Eternals weren't around for into that to catch them up. But it was an interesting piece with the archaeologist and his daughter and Ikaris sort of digging their way into the tomb, the Inca tomb, to find the signal for the gods. And already some interesting little play. I like the Ikaris character and how quickly it becomes Ikaris, but how Kirby was still playing around with secret identities a little bit.
Yep.
You get the introduction to the Deviants with Core, although I thought that character was, I don't know, he's very different in that book than I found going forward. But anyway, so they're digging their way into the Inca tomb, and they find evidence that the Incas had contact with some sort of celestial beings, which they're referring to as gods at this time. And Ikaris quickly reveals himself to be Ikaris, the Eternal, and then quickly explains everything. And then you get a bit of action and some fighting between some rather inept henchmen and a disgruntled skinny pink man, and it's sort of the issue for you there, and it ends with the arrival of the Celestials.
I love just how Kirby this whole thing screams from start to finish. The designs of the statues, those ancient statues, and the things like the shroud gun is like, that's such a he's trying to use sort of futuristic kind of technology, but it's still firmly rooted in, I even think, even though this is 1976, still the 60s. It's a gun that shoots a fabric that wraps around you.
I just kind of figured he'd brought that back from him, with him from DC off Batman's utility belt.
Yeah, it's a shark repellent bat spray, right? What do you think it does?
Also, how none of the DC villains ever thought to use that on Superman? Like
the shroud gun?
To block the eyes. Man.
Yeah.
That's literally what it was, because they were trying to stop Ikaris's powers.
Yeah.
I mean, Ikaris is basically I wouldn't even call a powered down Superman, because depending on the issue, he's sometimes a powered up Superman.
But he's definitely a Superman analog,
yes,
for sure.
And they were trying to stop him from shooting things out of his eyes and used a shroud gun, and yet somehow Luthor has never thought of that.
I liked the characters of Dr. Damien and Margot and Ikaris, but I mean those two in particular, because they are our eyes into the Eternals world, right? They are the people that don't know that any of this is going on. They're experiencing it for the first time, just like we are.
But they're also the reason why we need the history.
Yeah.
If they aren't there, then there's no reason for somebody who knows the history, like Ikaris, to explain the history to nobody or to somebody who already knows it. So they're the vessel that moves the story along.
And it's also necessary for the story because we're dealing with these 3 races, and humans are one of the races. Now, I'm hoping that you all who are listening have read this material, but just in case you haven't read this material,
I can summarize it.
Or is that introduced in this issue or the next issue?
No, it's in this issue. The Ikaris, after explaining that he is in fact Ikaris, he goes on to explain that the Celestials had, or he refers to them as gods at this point, had arrived on Earth. They'd been attracted by the burgeoning life forms. They studied us a bit, determined that apes seemed like an interesting specimen, took an ape and started running some experiments using cosmic chemistry, as Kirby refers to it. And out of that, they ended up creating 3 powerful new species, humans being one of them. We were supposedly the balance of the 2 species, the Eternals being the other, who were more like children than creations. And
peace-loving.
Yeah, they're very peace-loving. They're also quite powerful. They're immune to death and time. And then the Deviants, which they refer to as a destructive failure in the book. So the Deviants, and they say they're unstable. Each new generation of Deviant appeared in new and monstrous ways. His lot was constant war. And so that sort of explains it. So all 3 species are supposed to be derived from apes being experimented on with cosmic chemistry.
Yeah, to expand on that a bit, the Celestials are these cosmic beings who travel the universe, and this is what they do. They find the sort of prevalent, and I don't know why apes were the prevalent ones at the time here, but supposedly the prevalent creature of the time and give them a little bit of
Like a kickstart.
a kickstart. Yeah, they give them a little bit of a kickstart in evolution. And so then there were 3 Celestials who did these experiments, and Zirin the Tester made Deviants, Homo descendus, and they made them have unstable genes so that each one would be different from the next when they were born. And then Nezar the Calculator, actually when they created he created the Eternals, gave them the ability to tap into cosmic power, which gave them these abilities and immortality. And then the humans, Homo sapiens, and interesting little fact here, Oneg the Prober gave them a latent gene for future potential for evolution.
Is that an X gene?
It is an X gene.
Oh,
it later became the X gene, which is how we have the mutants as we know them now.
Okay.
Homo superior. Oh, and Eternals would be Homo immortalis.
And there's actually way more to the story as well that they don't even like that gets developed after Kirby leaves the book, of course. Like the Inhumans are tied into it eventually, and then there's also like who created the Celestials. There's a whole another big story there.
And one thing that's being explored right now in a new Eternals miniseries, I think it's called Thanos Rises, is that the Titans are actually a branch of the Eternals, and Mentor was one of the Eternals.
That's been long known that Thanos was one of the Eternals, but he had a defect that caused him to look like a deviant.
He's a deviant.
Right. Well, they talk about why that is in this. That because they're immortal, the Eternals aren't supposed to breed. They're not supposed to actually birth children. And Mentor's like, that's dumb. We should be able to do that. And so he goes off and tries that on his own. And then
on his own?
Well, not on his own. he and his wife.
That's why he didn't succeed and got stuck with Thanos.
No, but no. He and his wife they go and have a baby, and it turns out to be Thanos. And they're like, oh, this is not good. We should never do this again.
Didn't they also have a Star Fox?
They did have a Star Fox. So I don't know how that plays in yet. We'll see. There's only been one issue so far.
They have made reference to Thanos being a descendant of the Eternals already in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well. Because when he arrives on the planet, Red Skull refers to him as son of Alars.
Oh, yes,
Alars is Xerxes' brother.
Right, which is Mentor.
We haven't met Xerxes yet or anyone, but these characters that we're going to be running into over the next 10 issues.
Yeah.
We sort of got ahead of ourselves a bit there, but they did refer to him as son of Alars, which is a nod already to the fact that he is in fact a descendant of the Eternals.
Right, because if you only look at it from the Titans side, they never call him Alars, they call him Mentor.
Yeah.
And so if you go back to when he was Alars, then that's the connection to the Eternals. Yeah, nice.
Well, I want to talk about this cover. The cover of issue number 1 is the one that's used on the cover of the complete collection. And I think it's a terrible cover to put on the cover of the Eternals because it doesn't have any of the iconic characters on it. It has the statue of the Mayan god, and you can see Ikaris in his disguise, his clothing, like his human clothing, but it doesn't really tell you anything. It's not a really compelling book. But then I went and looked at every single issue that Jack Kirby did on all the covers, and there isn't a single cover on there that has like a good team pose or something. They're all actually kind of terrible covers for a collection. Not one that's representative of the whole thing.
It's funny. I love the image, but you're right. As a cover that draws you in, or it doesn't visually. I think it's a fantastic image, but it doesn't really compel you to go on. Almost the best thing would have been like the Ikaris they have on the inside fold, or him flying in his sort of Superman-y pose, or
battling the Hulk or something like that.
Yeah, that Hulk battle cover. Apparently.
That might have been the other good one, but that also isn't really representative of what this book is either.
I don't know if there was I don't know. You almost needed to put like one of those splash pages onto the cover, but then it's more a book about the Celestials if you do it that way.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make that comment. Anyway, do you have any other comments about issue number 1?
I love Kirby's art, but I was amazed at how much Kirby's art suits drawing pseudo Inca stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's because he's very boxy in all of his designs and his machinery and stuff. And when you're carving in stone, that's kind of what comes out a lot of the time as well with the ancient Mayan architecture and artwork.
Yeah, I was also going to say that I just really like how he incorporated the Incan mythology and how they saw Celestials and then worshipped them like gods and made all these statues about them.
Totally. Okay, well, why don't we go on to issue number 2?
This one is called The Celestials.
That's right. And so the Celestials are on their way. They've been
They've actually arrived.
Oh yeah, the Celestials have arrived on Earth in their giant spaceship, and Ikaris must reassemble the scattered molecules of an Incan hero named Motsin, the Lord of Flight, also known as Ajax, who is one of the Eternals. He's Ajak, the only Eternal that can communicate with the Celestials. Okay, so I just want to say...
Ajax is the only Eternal that can wash your dishes.
Yeah. Right.
But again, like I said, this is very steeped in like lore and mythology, and so there's a lot of Greek and Roman connections.
So can I say that it took me an embarrassingly long time to realize that all of these characters are based on Greek and Roman gods?
I knew it
embarrassingly long time.
I knew it for a few of them, but then a couple of them, like, it takes a little bit of it's a little bit of a stretch, like Makari.
But he blatantly says,
in this,
here.
But if you haven't read this, if you've only read newer Eternals, then they don't say that.
Okay, so
in the newer Eternals, they refer to him as Mark Curry sometimes too.
Yes, that's his his Ikaris name. Yes.
Well, I think I got through Ajak and Ikaris.
Yeah.
And
Sersi.
And Sersi, and then it wasn't until we got to Thena and Zurus in Olympia that I'm like, oh, I see what's going on here.
Yeah.
Maybe you were just thrown off by the biblical references.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, okay. So this issue is a huge info dump. There is so much backstory and explaining going on about how the Deviants took over the Earth, the battles with the Celestials that caused massive tidal waves. This tells us how Atlantis and Lemuria sank into the oceans.
Yep.
Now, I don't think at this point the Atlantis that they're talking about here is the same as Namor's Atlantis.
Well, at this point, Kirby was trying to do a self-contained outside of the Marvel Universe story.
Right.
So probably wasn't referring to Namor and Tuna or whatever that blue
Lemuria
is.
Atuma.
Yeah.
Not at all. It
eventually became that.
It eventually became that, and I like that he's again tying it into I don't want to say real world events, but real other mythologies that have come up and that kind of thing. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. So this is what is referred to as the second host. The first host was when the Celestials came and did their tinkering.
Yeah.
The second host was when they came back and saw, hey, the Deviants are like wrecking everything, and so then they sort of put a stop to that. The third host is described later, and then this one that they are experiencing is the fourth host.
Wait, hold on, the fourth? What?
Fourth? Yeah. Where have I heard that before? I want to note also that Marvel Comics at this time had 17-page books. They were cutting back on the page numbers. So these are all shorter stories. And within that, Kirby has usually at least 2 splash pages and usually a double-page spread in 17 pages. That's a lot of like single-page, huge-page things. So like, while I say this is an info dump, in all of these issues, the story actually doesn't move forward very fast at all because he has so many huge pages that are just one panel.
I love the double splash page, like image this one with the sense it gives you with the Mayan pyramids in the background and just this hovering ship that almost, I don't know how to describe it, like a giant mothership version of Blue Beetle's thing in the DC universe, and then the little humans and Ikaris and the Deviants just like barely on the page underneath it. Just the sense of scale that it gives you and the energy that it's giving off is stupendous.
With the good old-fashioned Kirby dot.
Yeah, this is on page 24 of the complete collection if you want to check that out.
If you don't want to read the series, you should just go check out all of the double panel pages for the visually striking like Kirby greatness.
Oh yeah.
Very true.
They're usually the 3rd and 4th page of each book.
So Marvel released one of their whatever king-size books that are like bigger than your bookshelf of the Eternals content. So I'm sure you could see these larger than life, probably as big as your coffee table.
I like how Kirby ties this in not only to like Atlantis and Lemuria, but also to like the biblical flood. There's one panel on page 33 where there's an ark, and he says Ikaris saying, "We Eternals on our mountaintop look down." Or Ikaris is saying, "I myself managed to guide a great wooden vessel to safety when I discovered it carried a cargo of humans and wildlife."
And they mistook me for a bird.
Yeah, I don't know. They thought I was a bird or something.
Yeah, and for those of you unfamiliar with the story of Noah's Ark, yeah, the dove that Noah sees is the sign that the floodwaters are receding, and that dove is apparently Ikaris. Very nice.
Biggest dove I've ever seen. Wearing clothes.
Yeah, bright blue and red and yellow.
As doves are.
They've evolved since then. I do have to say, a couple things in this book I found odd is at times in the first two books, Ikaris is presented as sort of like knowing everything and really sort of like leading the humans to where he needed them to go in order to get through this. But then at other times he seems baffled by what's going on, and I found that a bit confusing. That sometimes Ikaris, he knows exactly what to do to open this thing, or knows he's looking for the switch, and he knows why it's hidden from them all, and he can use his powers to disambiguate the situation. But at other times he seems absolutely shocked. Like he says at one point, "Think legends of strange visitations from space have become fact," as if he somehow was surprised that this was the case, and yet also intentionally brought humans here and sought out the signal that would bring back the Celestials. And so I found that a bit odd at times, that Ikaris was sort of playing two roles of both being discoverer and guide.
Yeah, and then like he's seeking out the beacon that will guide the Celestials, so that he can activate it seems. But then when the Celestials come, they're like, oh no, they're gonna destroy everything.
Yeah, and like he knows the history of and it happily tells us the history of everything, but then also is surprised like to discover that one of his fellow Eternals was working with the Inca people. Like he somehow like lost track of one of the few overly handsome, omnipotent,
immortal,
death-proof people on the planet. Like I don't know.
Well, he went away from the mountain, so
it was hard to see him there. Like
that's right.
So I found that a bit awkward at times. Like they almost needed a second character to play that surprise role, or I don't know, maybe needed to have Margaret or no, not Margaret, have Margot play that role a little bit more or something. But
I wonder how much Kirby had plotted this all in advance, because I agree, Ikaris completely changes after the first few issues.
Well, so do a lot of the characters.
Yeah,
like the ones that make it out of the first few issues. Change.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's because Ikaris is positioned to be the central character of our story here, but he's one of those characters, at least in the first half of this book, because I haven't read the second half yet, that gets kind of tossed to the side as we move forward and as other characters introduced, because pretty much once we get to issues like 7, 8, 9 and such, is like Thena seems to be the main character of the book. Her and I mean, Crow.
For a couple issues, Ikaris is even captured, and we don't see him at all.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that you didn't find him to be particularly compelling while he was locked in a tube?
Yeah, my understanding of the second host destroying everything is because the Deviants were like rebelling against the Celestials as their creators, and they were also like enslaving the humans, and then the Eternals were just ignoring the other two and just like doing their own search for higher enlightenment or whatever, and I guess that sort of upsets the experiment. They either need to all be like completely isolated to grow on their own, or work together, or with normal interactions or something. And so that's why they sort of tried to reset it. But also it's interesting that they have this molecular like reconstitution device, resurrection crypt, because that becomes important later on in.
Although I was confused why an immortal being that is immune to time and death needed to be preserved in the chamber. I know why his minions. I understood why his minions that are going to run flight control needed to be there, but I was a little confused.
But they're not immortal as in they can't die. They're immortal as in they won't age out. But if they were to die, then they can actually be like brought back. And often when they do, it comes with a lot of memory loss, and so then that's like how a lot of the new volumes of Eternals begin, where they're like brought back, and then they're like, I don't know what happened, because they sort of have to rediscover who they are, or where they are, or where everybody else is, or what happened, that kind of thing.
Interesting. Yeah, they should just have like a Krakoa or something.
Why couldn't they just pull a memento and tattoo it on their
right? They should just do that next time.
Okay, issue number 3.
All right. So this one is titled "The Devil in New York."
Does anyone else think that was a subtle reference to their Stanley Jack Kirby feud?
Could be.
Ajak is telling more of the story, but then they're sort of interrupted when they realize that the Celestials are going to encase the area as sort of their home base in a giant force field, and so Ikaris and Margot need to run. Also, we have Crow going back to his leader. What was his name?
Toad.
Grand Toad.
Toad, yeah.
Yeah, Great Toad, and we sort of start to see the Deviants side of things a little bit.
Great splash page, like double page spread.
Page 42.
Yeah, one of the Celestials, Arisham, the judge, with his cosmic thumb of decision.
justice.
Either you get the thumbs up or thumbs down. And he's going to decide if this planet's going to be spared or not.
The pattern on his thumb kind of reminds me a little bit of a ultimate nullifier shape.
Now, here's what's going to happen. He's putting a protective dome around himself, I guess.
He's standing on these pillars, and what we're told is he'll stay there for 50 years, and when he steps off, he will destroy everything.
Right. And so but there's also some sort of field around, so people who are within the field can't escape in the
But
the
also
50 years,
people can't get in.
also get in. So
Right.
so Ajak and Dr. Damien are going to stay in this dome, and Ikaris and Margot flee so that they don't get trapped there for
Margot
50 years.
doesn't flee willing.
No, she doesn't flee willingly, but she also will continue to age normally, so she doesn't, like, they're all like, you still have so much of your life ahead of you.
I find it interesting that that the professor would stay, or Dr. Damien would stay, because he's going to like discover all these things that an archaeologist would love to explore and discover, and he can't tell anybody about it.
Yeah, I thought that too. It's like, no, I'm gonna stay because this is like the dream. This is the discovery of the millennium. And it's like, yeah, but you're just gonna die in there. But he can make a whole lot of
He
notes.
could go into the resurrection chamber.
Right.
Can he? Can humans do that?
Yeah. They
Yeah,
have.
the Incans that were in there with
Right, of course. Yeah, that's right. So I guess Sure. But then he could also leave detailed journals or something that he can pass on to somebody else.
or ambiguous journals and force everyone to solve it.
In code.
Also in this, when Ikaris leaves, they go over and meet up with another Eternal that has been living in New York named Sersi. And it's interesting that in this issue, Sersi ends with a Y, and in the rest of them, it ends in an I.
Right. Yeah, they are definitely figuring things out still.
I thought that the spelling piece, because he refers to her and it's spelled with the Y when he's talking to the doorman, was supposedly her like really pathetic attempt at a secret identity.
Yeah, I thought so too. I thought so too, but then they continue for the rest of that issue with it.
Because don't they do? Isn't that in the, if I recall correctly, in one of the more modern ones again, where they're using like Mark Curry and
Yes.
Susie.
that.
She's
Doesn't
called
she-
Susie.
No, I thought she was still Sersi, but they used the spelling.
I don't
again.
remember. Yeah.
I think that is actually meant to be her like human version of her name that you
Oh,
don't
that
notice.
that could be. That could be.
Like Shang-Chi, you called yourself Sean.
Yeah.
What I think is interesting is that all of their powers seem to be mind-based in this. Like through the power of their mind and then like out their eyes for some reason, they are able to rearrange molecules and do this kind of stuff. But it's but it comes from this background of, you know, we were on the mountaintops just like meditating and thinking and stuff like that for millennia, and we developed this mind power through our connection to the cosmic energy. And that I don't believe is present or true in newer Eternals comic.
Or even by the end of this series. I like, though, the first reference to that, and I have the digital version and it doesn't come with page numbers, but when Ikaris is sitting in the airplane with Margot and he's explaining his powers and he suddenly switches his costume. He says to her, ages of development, given his great mind powers, then his clothes change and he says that was all just an illusion and he's now gone to his raiment. But the thing I love best about that scene isn't him explaining his powers. It's where he switches from a yellow t-shirt and some blue jeans to 3 glowy red discs and a red apron and a loincloth and some metal boots and gloves, and says that he was switching to something more simple.
Yeah. That is on page 50.
And a couple pages before that is a big splash page of all of the deviants, and we see Crow kind of trapped in that machine there.
All of the deviants so far.
Yeah, all of the deviants so far. And this is there's a little editor's box down in the bottom corner by Jack Kirby, and that is very eye-opening to the fact that Jack Kirby's editing his own stuff. Because any other issue, that would have been the editor making the editorial note at the bottom, but instead it's Jack Kirby. The consulting editor, it's called in this issue, is Archie Goodwin, and sometimes Marv Wolfman gets that credit as well. But I don't think that they really had any sort of hands-on stuff. I think it was probably there to just make sure pages were coming in on time or something.
This is the beginning of the changes to the characters from the first issue, because in the very first issue, Kor and his men say, we can't harm the Celestial, there's no way, all we can do is distract him. And at this one, they are now trying to hurt him because they've now got their Z-Ray. They haven't invented something else, they just have kicked up their weaponry, is now able to harm
Eternals.
Ikaris.
And later on, we find out that Lemuria has this whole arsenal of stuff designed to try to fight off the Celestials. But why would you do that if you just know that there's no way to hurt them?
Yeah, so they've definitely already, I think Kirby recognized that he maybe needed to tone down the powers of his characters a little bit.
I like that he's introducing one character at a time. So in the first one, we met Ikaris. In the second one, we met Ajak. And now we're meeting Sersi. And rather than throwing all 10 or 12 characters at us all at the same time in the first issue, we're getting them one at a time. I like that plot device. It makes for a nice, multi-story serialized story as well, because he has to kind of go on a hunt to find everybody.
But I do think that's part of what made the story drag a bit at times.
True, because he just kept on finding new people. Like if he had a team of 5, that would have been fine. But yeah, it did keep on going on and on, didn't it? Okay, we'll move on to issue number 4. This issue is called The Night of the Demons. And Ikaris attempts to stop the Deviants by himself, but ends up getting captured. And that's kind of all that really happens. This kind of wraps it up in one sentence. Not a whole lot happens. This is where I think, like you said, things start to slow down a little bit, because we're introducing so many characters, so each one gets to tell their backstory and stuff. So in this one, Sersi tells her backstory. It's actually, her story is kind of cool because it ties into a couple of different mythologies of the past.
See, again, Ikaris gets less and less powerful. He's now captured, and they're now using hand pistols instead of a flying attack ship.
It wasn't.
Right.
It wasn't his fault. It was the brain mine.
Yeah, but it's still shot out of a hand pistol. The one thing I noticed with this is at times the panels of the demons in this issue that are flying around New York City reminded me of parademons.
Yeah, for sure.
It was one of those callbacks to the New Gods and all of that piece. This is
Yeah.
the one, though, on, again, I don't have the panel, where Sersi talks about turning the Greeks into pigs, and they make reference to the Ulysses story.
Yep.
The Odyssey. It is the panel where you'd think they'd never seen a spoon or fork, and the sounds they made when they filled their bellies with food. And then Margot says, "Sersi of legends, you're that Sersi." And she says, "The Greek storytellers never could spell my name right." That is the reference to her name from the previous book. And at least within Marvel's own websites, they do reference her first appearance being way back then. So that is your one hint towards that.
Nice.
Which means that she was not originally, although I don't know if Kirby himself knew he was referencing back to that old timely book or not.
No, I thought he was just meaning spelling the name as in, like, in the Greek mythology, Sersi is Cerce.
Yes, but consistently they seem to reference that Venus book number 9 as the first one, which tends to suggest that they are the same character.
Yeah.
Now, Marvel gets another character named Sersi, spelled that way with the C.
In Excalibur.
In Excalibur, yeah, that's right. That happens like in the 80s, I think, or maybe the early 90s.
I like the fact that this is, again, references to random bits of mythology from human history. So she references the stories of Ulysses from the Greeks, and as Kurtis said, these are the Greek gods, but she also references Merlin in her backstory.
That's
and
right.
Talks about how she taught Merlin magic, which brings her into sort of some of the Anglo-Saxon mythology as well. So Kirby is really working hard to tie his book into the greater
all mythologies. And we saw the biblical references already.
Yep.
Sorry, clarification. The Excalibur character is Cerise.
Oh, Cerise. Oh, yeah. That's right.
Which is French for cherry.
Cerise.
Yes, and so she has like this red costume with like cherry pink red powers. So.
Not the same character at all. So forget what I just said. It was totally wrong.
The Sersi in this book, by the way, is probably the most, like, in this issue, not Eternals the book, but this this issue number 4 is probably her most powerful. Like, I don't think she's this powerful again ever, redeflecting flames, and like even by the end of this book she seems to have been depowered already, but I don't remember her being quite this powerful when she was taking on the X-Men during the Blood Ties series, or at any point while she was fighting Dane Whitman's clone, or being kidnapped by the Kree, or
She also acts very immature through these issues, which is not the Sersi that we know from Avengers.
to be fair though, she's only a few thousand years old. Still a lot of time to grow up.
Just a little kid.
Now she's constantly referencing like dancing and like going out for fun kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that the creatures that are sent to ravage New York are called mutate.
Yep.
So the deviants are already supposed to be pretty monstrous, and they have these unstable genes so that they can actually, as Crow demonstrates, change their own biology. Like he grows horns or makes them disappear and stuff. So what exactly defines a mutate in the deviant world?
I think the mutates all look the same, so I think they're like the creation of the deviant.
Yes, and that actually is something that comes along later on in their mythology.
Because it says on page 64 at the top, a winged mutated deviant.
Yeah, so I think it's established, or that little line there is fleshed out later, that the deviants experiment on themselves and I think they create the lava men, and I think the moloids also, which then they branch out and create different underground communities. I can't remember if it's the moloids also, but I'm pretty sure it's the lava men. And then the lava men are the ones that Tyrannus is in control of, or something like that, right? Yeah, because there's like a whole bunch of subterranean races, and the deviants are just one of them eventually. We get our first real look at the next big celestial, and he's unnamed. It's the yellow one. He's unnamed in this issue, but it's Gamemnon, the Gatherer.
Which would be short for Agamemnon from Greek mythology.
Right. And his design will change a little bit, but he's kind of the next big celestial that we see here. Now, he's there to gather data, and I think we'll see him do a little bit more in one of the future issues here. Okay, shall we move on to issue number 5?
Just even before we get into the story of issue 5, the cover of this issue to me really seemed to be sort of fourth worldy. The blue guy in the middle just to me looks almost like he's Metron.
It's Domo.
No, I know who it is.
Okay.
The figure, you don't know if you haven't read the book, so just if you're looking at the cover, you got 4 unknown characters.
Right, because this is all of their first appearances.
Yeah. And to me, that was my first takeaway. Just looking at the cover of that one, it seemed to be a real nod towards that.
And even Makari's outfit could maybe be seen as kind of reminiscent of Orion.
Yes, yeah. So, anyways, this one is the follow up to Sersi and Margot were captured in the last issue, and so now being taken to the undersea kingdom of Lemuria, which I guess is not the most luxurious place for a vacation. We encounter Makari, or we get the Makari story fleshed out a bit more. We did encounter Makari last issue briefly when he referenced that he's actually Mercury and humans have a speech impediment. But we do meet Thena, who's come now to help defend New York from the deviant attack as well, and then we encounter Zurus, and so that's sort of the big piece with this. And they also determined that Ikaris has been captured, so there's that concern as well. You meet Domo for the first time, and so you're sort of getting a better sense. This is the one issue where Kirby has sped up the introduction of characters a bit more. We're jamming a bunch of them into the 17 pages here. This is again where I was going to say you get a less and less powered up Sersi. They're not even bothering to hide her eyes anymore. You get some pretty heroic cops trying to fight the mutates flying around the city. But for the most part, this issue is sort of more establishing the structure of the other Eternals. So you've got Zurus, you've got Thena, you've got Domo, and all of them sort of discussing a bit what to do, and then riding their sort of knockoff Fantastic car into New York City in order to help sort of defend the city from the demons, which is another good example of how Kirby was trying to build something outside of the regular Marvel universe, because a bunch of demons attacking New York City would have been the perfect chance to bring in a Spider-Man or a Fantastic Four
Avengers or something.
But even at the end, he doesn't use any of the established military or government official people, he also comes up with his own at the end, because it's the first time we see the Pentagon reaction to a giant celestial being putting up a force field and hovering over the middle of Mexico. So that's sort of that piece. And keep in mind that in the first issue, the American army already lost one of its airplanes. So it's not like they're unaware of the situation, because they did lose one to the Deviants previously. So anyways, that's sort of this issue is a lot of exposition around who's in charge of what and what is the hierarchy of the Eternals, coupled with some demons fighting some cops.
On page 84, we have Zurus and Athena playing a game. They are auto boxers, and one is red and one is blue, and the red one punches the head off of the blue one, and I'm pretty sure this is a reference to Rock'em Sock'em Robots.
Yeah, definitely.
And I had to look it up because I wasn't sure when it was made. They were made in 1964, so they're definitely around by then. And then on the next page, Makari's trying to get his point across, and he's taking some time. So Athena says, "Don't keep us guessing. Is it animal, mineral, or vegetable?" Which I believe is a reference to 20 Questions, where normally you get that information as the first bit.
In this issue, Sersi uses her powers of rearranging molecules. She turns someone's hand into wood. That's something that we hadn't seen yet, because she had these eye beams or whatever. But now we get this part of Sersi, which seems to be her main power, but it's only being introduced now, post to last issue. So I don't know if it was like an afterthought or what, but you think that if it was her main power, Jack would have used it at least a little bit in the first time, in her first appearance here in the book, to explain what she can do.
She also never turns anyone else to wood again.
No.
Ever.
No, but she rearranges molecules again in a little elemental fashion.
And again, it's expressed as she uses her mind to rearrange the molecules, but she does it through I-beam.
Right, yes.
Yeah, so it's a very odd source or application of their power.
This is also the first issue where Mike Royer is doing the inks, and Mike Royer would go on to be pretty much exclusively Jack Kirby's ink from this point on. Once again, this issue slows things down and really takes its time. Every character needs to have a scene where they talk a lot, and at this point I'm like, why aren't the Celestials doing anything? They're just standing there.
They're watching. They're supposed to be watching.
I know, and like, this is going to be the next 50 years? Come on.
I do love the fact that Thena brings her like Wookiee level crossbow to the fight. Like, she doesn't just use her. She doesn't have eye beams like the other Eternal. She's fighting the demons with a crossbow in it.
Well, that's how I felt when in the first Avengers movie, when Black Widow was in the New York battle with 2 handguns against all of those aliens.
Yeah, what did you want, a knife?
Well, exactly. It's like.
It's not like she was running around with a bow and arrow or something useless.
I think Hawkeye proved that the bow and arrow worked pretty well in that battle.
Anyways, yeah, no, I just love her Wookiee level. Like, just it reminded me of when they start shooting. Chewbacca starts shooting everything with his crossbow, blowing up airplanes.
That's
stuff,
right.
So.
Okay, issue number 6, Gods and Men at City College.
Again, a great chance to bring in a Spider-Man, or an Iceman, or a Human Torch, or
the Lizard.
Any of the Marvel characters known to be hanging around college campuses at this era.
Eternals and the Deviants they've formed a truce because they realize that working together is how they are going to stop the Celestials from destroying everything. So Margot brings them to a prominent anthropologist to be presented to the public. And I find this to be a weird move, because after this, the fact that they're known to the public doesn't really matter, at least in the issues that we've read here. It's like, why are they bothering to do this?
Yeah, the idea is supposed to be, hey, let's bring together all 3 of these races that were created by the Celestials to work together, and then they don't involve the humans for the rest of it.
Yeah.
And in fact, like, they say, hey, let's present ourselves so that people will understand us, and they have Crow as the only representation of the Deviants. And then in later issues, he continues on with this, I am what people call Satan, I'm the devil. And so it's like, well, I thought you wanted them to like know who you were and work together with you, but now you're doing that.
Yeah, they could have picked it's not a more better looking representative, but maybe one that hasn't terrorized humanity in the past few millenniums.
Or at least be a little more consistent. He could have, if they put this move after that, like those scenes where, he's seen terrorizing humans,
yeah,
then it would make a little more sense maybe.
2 issues later, they have a better looking option.
Yes,
that's true.
I forgot to mention the previous issues, but it comes up here. Ajak is aware of Ikaris being trapped in a golden, I don't know, tube. And plunged, buried in the bottom of the earth. And Ikaris, for whatever reason, declines to rescue him because he's told by his flight crew of Incas that they could easily get him out of there.
You mean Ajak declines to rescue him?
Yeah, Ajak declines to rescue Ikaris. He's totally could. And I found that also interesting. Like, he was annoyed with Ikaris, and there's some sort of animosity there. And so we get, in this issue, we get the Deviants themselves releasing their own prisoner.
Yeah, I thought that was weird too. I didn't really fully understand how they negotiated his release.
Yeah, the whole thing was kind of weird because the truce happens and you don't even kind of realize that it's happening, but it's like, and all of a sudden everybody has a change of heart, and and then they just leave. And there's other instances where like the characters just take off and it's just said in one dialogue panel, oh, they're gone, and it's like all of a sudden they appear somewhere else, and I have to think hard. Oh, when did they leave? So his plotting is not the best in that sense, but I will say that he is a master of composition. This issue has so much great artwork in it. That's just the panels, the composition, everything. That every page is beautifully laid out so that you can see all of the action, and like the characters are positioned in the boxes like really, really well. So, Jack Kirby's a master at this time and that sort of thing. So he knows exactly what he's doing. Now, on page 99 of the complete collection, the top panel has these police officers pointing all of their guns at Crow, and then you see coming in the background Thena and Makari on a ship coming in. Now, this panel here I wanted to talk about because it's classic Kirby. He loves to tell a huge story in one panel. Now, this is hard to do because, of course, comics don't move. So if you're trying to tell a story that has a passage of time, but you're telling it in one single static panel, you have to be very careful with the composition and also the dialogue. So if you just look at it without the dialogue, all you see is the cops facing off against Crow and then the ship coming in the background. But once you add in the dialogue, you can see that there's actually passage of time. So the police officers are saying their thing. If you're the devil, you won't be bothered by a few punctures from high-powered ammo. So right off the bat, these two are fighting. The ship isn't anywhere to be seen. That's what's happening when you encounter the left side of this panel. And then as your eye scrolls right, then the plane enters the scene, and they have words. Cease all action, human. In the name of Xeris, the Prime Eternal, I claim that deviant dog. So like they have time to say what they're saying as the plane is rushing toward them. And then as your eye scrolls to the right side of the panel, then Crow has a response. So it's like there's a whole, I would say like, maybe a minute and a half that takes place during this one panel, but visually it's all there all at the same time. So that kind of thing is cool. I like seeing Kirby do that. And that's just one example throughout this entire book. He does it over and over again. This is also our very, very first reference, and we've mentioned this before, to anything connected to 616, because they say at the bottom of the last page, there's a bubble, a voice coming over radio. It says, "Shield to Group 1, come in Group 1, report."
Now, that panel, and then the next issue where Shield gets involved, there is a reference in the same book you quoted at the start of this, the history of Marvel Universe, to mounting pressure from editorial to start making reference to previous Kirby creations, including or specifically Shield. And so I, knowing that, wonder if this was Kirby's choice or was something that he sort of conceded through those editorial conversations.
I would probably guess that it was the latter, because I would think that if this was his choice, he would explain more about who S.H.I.E.L.D. is.
Well, I don't think they need to at Marvel at this point, especially because Kirby was the one who had the long run on S.H.I.E.L.D. before.
No, but I mean, even just like state when these people show up that they are from S.H.I.E.L.D., but they don't. They just leave it, and then there's this one little panel where you get the one word.
This is also the issue where he turns someone's head into the Thing.
That's also true, yes, the page before that.
Which again is a reference to, or a callback to previous Kirby work. And since he's, I think, arguably is as well known for the Fantastic Four as anything, I think was another concession. So I do wonder how much of this issue was the first time you're seeing Kirby lose full autonomy. Yeah,
the Thing, I was going to say that the Thing was the first time it ties into the 616, but there's no reference that the thing actually exists in this world. It could have been, a comic book
No,
character.
but they referenced the Fantastic Four in the dialogue.
Yeah, but it could have been, they could have seen a Fantastic Four movie in this world or something like that. Whereas these S.H.I.E.L.D. guys are actually S.H.I.E.L.D.
Roger
agents.
Corman hadn't made his Fantastic Four movie yet, Curtis. They couldn't have seen it.
There was an issue of What If where there's the Fantastic Four get a movie made of them, and that was around this time.
Well,
in the
also
70s.
Namor funded a movie for the Fantastic Four in issue. Oh, I don't remember what issue. It's an early one.
One of those early ones.
Yeah.
All right, well then there you go.
It was a trap. It was a trick to try and trap them and defeat them, but then they
That would
didn't.
explain the skepticism of the humans, because I found the human skepticism of these superpowered beings a bit odd, considering you exist in the Marvel universe and
Right.
have already encountered Thor and the Hulk and the
That's right.
Avengers and the X-Men and everything else. And so then somebody being like, I'm an eternal being who's got some superpowers, and you're like, no, that's not possible. Seemed a bit odd to me. The other thing just on this, I don't understand Kor's suit that he wears into New York City
Neither
throughout
do
this
I.
issue, especially at the beginning when he's still trying to portray himself as the devil. If you've bothered to grow devil horns to then tell people that you are Satan, why would you then put on a large pink hood that hides your horn?
Yeah.
Like it seemed like an odd approach to trying to fulfill your ruse.
And it's not just a hood. It's like a full-on bubble helmet. Yeah.
But
and some,
all of the
yeah.
mutates have that too, and I suspected that it was because after being, centuries and centuries underground, that they are sensitive to, the heat that the sun gives off, maybe.
And
or
that
the
would make
light or
sense,
something.
except that
He doesn't wear it
it the rest of the time.
Yeah, that's one of those things that just gets dropped by Kirby after a while.
Yeah, also, now that he's trying to be friendly, he's okay with showing you his demon horns. Like it was,
Right.
Oh, now that we're going to meet the humans and try and have a truce, demon horns. Nothing says trust me, like looking like the devil.
But then he puts them away.
Eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was a bit odd.
Yep. Well, you want to do issue number 7?
Sure. So, issue number 7 is called The Fourth Host. And in this, we go back to Dr. Damien and Ajak as they watch some of the Celestials gathering their data and information. We have the captured S.H.I.E.L.D. agents returned to Dr. Damien and Ajak.
I love it. They delivered them to him in a box.
Yep. And
There's
well,
just
they
the
were
scattered molecules.
demolecularized.
Yep. Here you go, guys.
And then the S.H.I.E.L.D. guys, instead of trying to understand their situation, automatically go into fight mode. And then also we see the rest of the fourth host of Celestials starting to spread themselves around the world and bring about their trouble.
This is what they call Alpha Day or something like that, like the
We
beginning
also
of the
see
end.
at the very last page, we get this picture of Arishem with his judgment thumb, and it's starting to turn maybe toward the downside.
No.
So yeah, like I said, this is the fourth host. So we don't know a lot about the third host. One of the later issues sort of touches on it a little bit, but the purpose of this one is sort of supposed to be the final judgment of how this experiment has gone. It's been thousands of years now. Is this a success by whatever means of judgment they have? And so we have Gamemnon the Gatherer, who has his rod of life seed capsules, which basically takes all of the like life forms that they come across, breaks them down into their molecules and stores them in a little box, and then they're passed over to Jemiah the analyzer, who is going to like study all the molecules and come up with some sort of solution there.
This was an interesting issue because it only focuses on one group of characters throughout the entire issue. We don't get any subplots with Sersi, we don't get any subplots with Thena or Crow or Ikaris or anybody else. It is just Ajak. So while I appreciate fleshing out their story a little bit, it also meant that we're just stalling on the other storylines as well.
Yeah, this is why it seems like it drags on sometimes, because instead of getting a little bit of each story, we get a lot of one story and then a lot of the other story. And when we're focusing on one story, the other one can't progress at all.
I didn't like these S.H.I.E.L.D. agents at all. I thought they just kind of gummed up the whole story. Like,
Yeah.
why are we focusing on these guys?
I have to wonder if that wasn't intentional, though. I don't want to put them in here, so I'm going to make them incompetent so that you stop making me put them in.
Yes.
Could be. They just seem so out of place. It was just, they served no purpose. I mean, they even brought a device to destroy the Celestials, and it proved, I mean, that maybe that was their point, just to show that humans think that they can deal with the situation on their own, but they can't. But it was like, it was dumb to have them, I thought.
What I found interesting about this issue is that it's the first time they actually mention Celestials by name several times through this entire issue, and then after this issue, they don't.
They don't use their names at all?
They don't call them. Well, they don't call them, like, they don't refer to them as Celestials. At least not that I noticed.
Okay.
Or
at least in the issues that we read.
Right. Yeah. They go back to calling them. What do they call
Space
them?
gods.
Space gods. Yeah. They go back to calling them space gods. Now, one thing now that I think of just now, that I didn't pay attention to is who's actually speaking, and it might be that that Ajak, who is speaking in this comic, calls them Celestials, and everybody else calls them space gods, and doesn't know to call them Celestials because they're outside the bubble.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That could be the case.
Also, we know Ajak was known for communicating with them, where no one else has had that same.
Yeah.
Because Ajak was there in the third wave with the Inca,
Right.
connecting with him. Although
Yeah, exactly.
Ajak does reference that Zurus was also there.
Right. But being the one who talks to them, it makes sense that he knows they're called Celestials. And, he was demolecularized or whatever, so he wouldn't necessarily have a chance to tell anybody. But then I found it weird that once he starts talking about it, we don't hear that name later on. But then, now that I think about it, we don't often come back to Ajak and the Doctor in the last 3 issues that we're looking at today.
No, that's true. But again, an example of how the powers of the Eternal seem to be a bit inconsistent. One of the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents manages to sucker punch him temporarily.
Right.
Stunning an Eternal. Like, their powers do seem to be sort of all over the map. Or S.H.I.E.L.D. has better training than I've been led to believe in the previous comics I've read.
One thing that I love about Jack Kirby's designs here is that each Celestial has a completely different look, and they are very unique looking.
I like the fact that each Celestial has, like, conveys a personality and an emotion, and yet somehow they don't all have facial features. Like, some of them have noses and eyes and mouths, but some of them don't, and yet somehow you look at it and you're still able to recognize
that's a humanoid figure.
Yeah.
No, totally.
I think that's an incredible piece on Kirby's part. Like, he's created these very odd-looking, non-humanoid things that are human. Like,
yeah,
but they all still look like they belong together.
Yes.
You say they're
Yes.
they are all unique and they all look completely different, but they also look all the same.
Yeah, like you talked about the Deviants. They all look completely different.
Yeah,
but they don't look like a cohesive group, which is the point, right? You know, their unstable genetics makes them completely different when they're born. But these Celestials are very clearly the same species, but all look very different.
Okay, let's go on to the next issue. It's called The City of Toads, and this is issue number 8. Crow convinces Thena to accompany him to his home in Lemuria, the underwater city, the fallen city. And in particular, the City of Toads, which is kind of the capital city. I think they also call it New Lemura. And this is where, the Grand Toad happens to be. And there they witness a gladiator-type battle. This is so classic of, deviant-type races where they just...
You know a lot of those?
Yes. I'm friends with several.
All the deviant races.
No, I mean, it's just like, Planet of the Apes and, Thor Ragnarok was the same situations. Like, you pit your characters against each other in these battles. And here we're introduced to 2 characters. One is Kurtis, who is a giant red character, a deviant, who is like a big bad monster. All of the deviants seem to not like him or are scared of him, and he seems to be the champion. And then we're also introduced to Reject, who is a beautiful looking deviant, he's also a champion. I guess he's winning all the battles. So this is kind of like the last tier in their bracket.
This is the deviant that I was referring to that might have perhaps made a better choice
to represent
as a representative to the human race than the one who's decided to portray himself as the devil.
Yeah, except so Reject looks, he kind of reminds me of the Beyonder, actually, the way that he's all dressed in silver with the black hair and such. But Reject is called Reject because he has been rejected by all the deviants because he doesn't look ugly enough.
His name's not Reject. His name's Ransack the Reject.
Ransack the Reject. Well, they just call him the Reject.
Yes,
in most of it, yeah.
The Reject, but his actual name's Ransack.
Ransack. Do they say that in here? I missed that.
I don't know if it comes up in this yet or not, but his name...
I missed it too. I think the idea is that he looks like an Eternal.
Yeah.
He looks like one of their mortal enemies. So
they hate him.
They hate him, yeah.
And he's got definitely some issues because he lashes out, or actually he doesn't lash out in this issue. That's the next one.
Yeah. But yeah, Thena looks at him and goes, oh, maybe he's not that bad. How could he possibly be a deviant?
That comes down to the unstable constant warring piece.
Right.
Okay, so this was the point where I was like, like, man, if this were a TV show, it would be Dragon Ball Z, because it is moving so slow, and it's like the overall plot isn't going anywhere, and it's gonna take ages for this 50-year period to
Really, because see, when I read this, if this was a TV show, I would have thought to myself it was like some ridiculous teen drama,
Right.
Because suddenly Thena and Kor are ex-lovers,
Yeah,
and
that's
having
right.
a lover's spat, and I was like, where did this come from? It's like a bad plot from the OC or Dawson's Creek or something, and it made no sense to me at all that it turns out these two were at one point lovers. Like,
But I wondered if that was a reference to something in old Greek mythology or something like that. Because I was thinking of like Persephone having to go down and live with Hades or whatever. They kind of made, I mean, I know that's not these characters, but they kind of made reference to that. Like she had to spend some time with the Deviants or something like that in the past. Or maybe it was just another story that Jack wanted to tell at another time.
Oh, I don't know. Okay. Oh, hold on. The Earth. I was just seeing if there's a connection between Kronos and which I don't. So one thing that's interesting here is that on the cover, in the little text box, he's not called Crow, he's called Krona.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so I don't know if that is like some kind of link to Kronos from Greek mythology, or maybe it's an accidental reference to Krona, the former guardian of the universe from DC.
Huh.
Maybe somebody made a mistake there.
Does anyone have anything they want to say about this issue? Anything more?
None. I like Karkas better in the Thor books when he shows up later.
Yeah.
Spoil for Thor.
Well, why don't we go on to issue number 9?
I forgot to mention the from number 5, and we're well past that. It's not in the book itself, but in the original comic, there was a Hostess ad that featured Spider-Man fighting the Fly, who was a complete throwaway, nothing Spider-Man villain. But technically, the Fly had not appeared in ASM number 10 yet, ASM Annual number 10, which came out later that same month. But technically, his first appearance is a Hostess ad in the original issue of Eternals number 5.
Well, that's funny.
Yeah. So if you weren't excited about issue 5 previously, finding an original copy in one of those dime bins, just so you can have the first appearance of the Fly.
It's a key issue. Get it slabbed, everybody.
You just wait. You don't know. I mean, you have no idea which other Spider-Man villains are showing up in this next Spider-Man movie.
Because
right.
you know, if the Fly shows up in one of those movies, the speculators are going to go nuts for it.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Oh, you
Well,
bet.
I mean, think of
They're
all
gonna
the
go for
people
the wrong-
running out for Venus number 9 now that I've mentioned it.
That's right.
Okay, Craig, you want to take us through issue number 9?
So issue 9 is The Killing Machine, and this one is now the Deviants and the Eternals are sort of fully established themselves with the humans and the wider population of Earth, and now we're also, the wider Earth population is becoming aware of the Celestial problem as well, and so they're now planning out their attack. So the Celestials are planning their attack on the Deviant Kingdom of Lemuria, and in this one, Thena's really having to choose between whether she wants to be loyal to her former lover or whether she's going to be loyal to the Eternals, because they have been called back to their mountaintop, and so that's sort of one of the big issues there. You have also the introduction of Sprite, who is the Eternal trapped in a child's body who tends to be very mischievous, so she plays a trick in this one. There's a giant monster which turns to be Sprite, and then you get references to, so not references, you get the Celestials showing up all over the Earth, so they're starting to move themselves position. So they're showing up in Australia, they're showing up in Siberia and Miami Beach, and so you're getting Eternal sort of around the globe in this issue. And at the end of this, Karkas and Ransack have their big battle, after which Ransack wins and tries to destroy the palace of the Great Toad. And so that's sort of the gist of this issue.
There's also a little plot point that's going to play big in the next issue here. Eason, which Celestial is he? Eason, he goes underwater.
He heads to the Lemuria city.
Yes, that's right. So he's positioning himself under sea. That's the thing that's the place that he's going to oversee. Oversee. He's going to oversee the undersea.
Do you see?
Okay, so I really like this introduction to the Reject as he battles Karkas, because it shows that while we thought that he was going to be a level-headed Eternal type character, he actually still acts like a deviant. He is completely, full of rage and mistrust and just is fighting and stuff like that. So that I thought was a nice little twist, because I thought it would have been kind of on the nose for him to just be kind of altruistic like the rest of the Eternals. So that was nice.
I found it interesting again that Thena is surprised that this deviant, particularly Karkas, is listed as a mutate, and she's surprised that he can talk and think.
Well, yeah, which makes you wonder if they all can.
Well,
or
some
if
of
they
the other
just
ones that
don't.
were attacking the Earth were talking. So I'm again, it's one of these things where there's clearly supposed to be some sort of like lore around this, but it hasn't really been either fleshed out properly or explained or anything like that.
Yeah, he doesn't have his own mythology.
No.
Set in stone.
He hasn't sort of figured it out yet. No. I'm also confused by the acts of these other Celestials. I thought the point was to wait 50 years and check it all out, and then destroy everything at that point. But particularly the one at Lemuria is already trying to destroy Lemuria, and the other ones, they're not really attacking, but they're like setting up shop. It's not like they're just watching.
Right.
Yeah, they do seem to be speeding up their 50-year schedule
Into like a day.
Which is good. I'm glad that they're moving forward with their plot a little bit here.
Yeah.
And in fact, the next issue is the one that I like the most out of all of these ones here. I thought it was really good. It's called Mother. This is issue 10. This is the final issue we're going to talk about today. And we go back to Olympia and we get to know Zuras a little bit more. Because he's kind of one character that just kind of showed up in that one issue, didn't really do anything, except his body got electrified and bolts of lightning were coming out of him. But in this one, Zuras discovers the actual purpose of the Celestials being on Earth, which is that they're going to judge it and destroy it. I guess that only Ajak knew that before or something. So he activates something called the Unifier, which calls all of the... It's a beacon. It sends out a little homing signal or something like that, a distress call to all Eternals, and they are all called back to Olympia. So everybody kind of drops what they're doing, and they head home, including Thena, who has to leave Crow and all of those other guys to go back home. But before she does that, she actually takes compassion on Reject and Karkas, both of them, and says, if you want, you can come with me to Olympia and you will have sanctuary there. We will care for you. And so they go with her. So I thought that was a cool thing. I fully expected Reject to go, but I did not expect Karkas to go too. So I liked that. I thought that was really kind of cool. I actually like the relationship between Thena and Crow, even though you were like, they're shoehorning this kind of teen soap opera drama kind of aspect to it. But I like it because it gives Crow a much deeper dimension than just being like a war-hungry deviant.
I agree. I really do like it. It does come out of left field. It's weird. It doesn't really fit, but it's done well. And like just sort of isolated from everything else, it's done well. Also, it gives Thena an opportunity to show that she has that she sees potential in the deviants.
Right.
Like they're not just these monsters who are like hopelessly outclassed, but she actually sees something in them. And there's this interesting message of like valuing yourself as you are, regardless of your looks. Right. She sees, hey, you could be something more if you just sort of like believe in yourself. If you like just put aside the fact that you look different, and you're focused on your abilities and who you are, then
she
you could...
also judged Karkas based on his appearance.
I know, right? But I mean, and it's easy to say coming from an Eternal who looks and acts perfect and everything is all fine and dandy for them. But it's interesting that she had that little moment there.
Yeah. This was the issue that I also found the timing to be really odd, and I'd mentioned this before, like his plotting isn't great. So at the beginning of this issue, we actually have Eason like reaching his hand into Lemuria, like through this little hole that leads to Lemuria, because he's like, oh, what's down there? And as an aside, it's kind of cool that he can like absorb the knowledge of the city just through his hand being there, but he ends up just destroying the city. Because it's like, if we're like studying an ant hill, like an ant farm, and we accidentally shake it up a little bit, like everything's destroyed, he probably did the same thing there. And then the waters start rushing in and everything's flooding. And then it gets to the point where they're rushing Toad and all of the royalty out of, because like the flood waters have reached the palace and it's like the whole city is collapsing. And then we move over to the arena and nothing's happening. And I thought to myself, I thought they were in Lemuria as well. How come, that's not happening? Like the world, and they have this huge long conversation, and nothing's happening. Like the waters aren't rising or whatever. And then they leave, and in the very last panel, then we see that Crow is like going to drown or whatever. So I thought that he could have had some signs that stuff was happening behind the scenes at the same time or something. But
and similarly, if we go with the Ikaris and Ikaris sort of plot line, we see them in the previous issue, which is page 154 in this collection.
Yep.
And Ikaris catches Sprite.
Yep.
Hey, you tricked us, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to catch you. And he does. And then
he deserves a spanking.
We next see them 22 pages later.
And if you're reading this in like as it originally came out, this is a whole month gone by.
Right. But all this stuff happens in this issue, and you finally get back to them.
And he's
giving him a spanking him. He's giving him a spanking for this for treating them for like tricking them. But like that's a long time. There's a lot of stuff that's happened in between there, but that story just paused.
Keep in mind that although Sprite is in the body of a child, Sprite is not a child.
Oh yeah, well that too,
is
right?
Another adult.
He's also thousands of years old. Interesting though that they mentioned that he's the Sprite in Shakespeare. Is that Midsummer Night's Dream? Yeah, Midsummer Night's Dream.
Correct, so is Sprite not a Greek character? Or no, those were Greek characters in that play, right?
They were riffs on some of them were.
Yeah.
It's sort of
inspired.
Yeah. Any more thoughts on number 10?
Yeah, the title of this is Mother, and it doesn't really talk about being a mother at all.
I thought that was a reference to Thena adopting the two. Like
It might be.
Like,
yeah, she's being motherly toward them.
Yeah, and she chooses them over her supposed lover. Like she abandoned.
I thought that it was going to be that Reject ends up being like her and Crow's child or something, but then she wouldn't necessarily be surprised by that. I would think.
Yeah. Anyways, that's how I took it as a reference to sort of her adopting them and choosing the kids over the father because she abandons Core.
Yeah, maybe.
Or sorry, Crow. She abandons Crow in the city and she takes the two other deviant mutates with her.
Mm-hmm.
It could also just be a reference to the parenting scene you've just discussed regarding Ikaris and Sprite. Quality 1970s parenting.
That's right.
Well, and that brings us to the end of what we are going to discuss today. Do either of you have any final thoughts about the first half of Kirby's Eternals?
It's a little messy. It's not bad. There's definitely there are moments of greatness in this, but you have to kind of dig for them. Like you said at the beginning, the art is great all across, but the story is just a little jumbled. It ebbs and flows in terms of the pacing, and some of the ideas shift. So there's good stuff in here, and I'm interested to see the second half to see if that gets a little more consistent.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that there are some great concepts, some really interesting ideas. I think that it's too big for the number of pages that Kirby had at his disposal. I think that sometimes it was a little bit overly wordy, and that causes it to drag a bit. I found also he's got too big a cast too quickly. I know you were talking previously about how you like that he paced it out sort of one character at a time, but
that was for the first half of the book.
It picks up that it's a pretty crowded book by the end. Sort of that part I found a bit it does take so long to come back to certain people, and I don't know if that was part of the issue, but it almost seemed to me like he was trying to build something outside the Marvel universe, and I don't think he was trying to build something outside the Marvel universe as much as he was trying to build his own Kirby universe, and you can sort of see that. And I think that he was maybe doing too much too fast.
Yeah, I will agree with all of your comments there. I think that it started off great. I really enjoyed the first few issues where the concepts were fresh and new, and we could see where he's kind of going. And then after a little bit, when it started to get meandering, I'm like, okay, I think this needs to change up. I think that if this were made today, I would maybe compare it to like Planetary or something with a high concept like that. And if Kirby were to be able to write in a more modern style where it isn't as dialogue heavy and he can stretch out the story for more issues, but because of that you can put more of the subplots in every issue or something like that, then maybe it would flow a little bit better.
Also with just 5 extra pages, right?
The 5 extra pages would have probably helped too, but I think that Kirby was just not as familiar with the long-term storytelling that he was trying to accomplish here. Because if you think back through the 60s, like through the 40s and 50s when he was doing that, those were all 15-page stories. It was all anthology based and whatever. And then you get into the Marvel era and it's all self-contained single issues. Yeah, there are little little plot threads that are happening underneath. But for the most part, it's like the story starts and stops in that one issue.
The monster of the week type of idea.
And then with the fourth world, he has all of those different plot points, but they all are within their own book. So it's like he doesn't have to shoehorn the Mr. Miracle storyline in the Forever People because it's all happening in Mr. Miracle. And he's getting 4 issues per month. I believe they're all monthly. No, actually, I think they were all bi-monthly. So it's like he got Jimmy Olsen and Mr. Miracle, for instance, on 1 month to tell those stories. And then he got Forever People and New Gods on the other month. And so like he had 4 times as many pages to tell his story per month as he is for Eternals right here. So I think he just has too big of a concept to really develop in what he was trying to do.
So you're saying that you think it would have worked better if you'd had, say, like an Ikaris book and an Ajak book. And,
I think that just to start, maybe just bump the number of pages up or something.
Or maybe they could have done it like a modern crossover story where there's like the fourth host miniseries and then there's tie-ins.
But even the thing with the host, like,
Yeah.
I mean, I think you've done a really good job of explaining that as best you can, Eric. But I mean, if you don't have that piece, there's like 1 panel per host to explain all of that. Like he's creating an incredible amount of
It's so much
backstory in 1 page, in just 4 panels. Like, the first host was tampering with the cosmic chemistry and creating things, and the second host was bringing order to chaos and crushing some deviants, and the third host was collecting some, like harvesting some stuff, and the Incas praising them, and they zipped around the planet for a little while, and now we're in the fourth host, and that's a lot of stuff to stick in there, and it was mostly exposition, and that's a lot of backstory as well that he tried to jam into like such a short amount of space.
Well, I'm eager to see where this goes. I know that plots don't get resolved because Kirby leaves Marvel again before he can finish up things again. So I'm not hopeful for the ending, but we're gonna see this through. We'll see what happens.
Though, the neat thing about it not being resolved is that it has allowed at various times other authors or creators to come in and really sort of explore where that was going.
Yeah.
Whereas in other things, they can take the characters, but they can't really take the story to an ending. And so that's like, we've had that reference in the more recent ones where every time they're resurrected, they don't remember who they are. And we've had that sort of interesting piece. I think that's the one thing. It obviously wasn't an intention of Kirby. I don't think Kirby set out to make an unfinished work, but that has sort of been the one upside, is you've been able to have different people come along and do different interpretations of how this might have ended.
Yeah.
So.
By the way, if you want as much information as possible on from these issues about the different hosts, that's on page 120 and 121.
Okay, well, that's all we're going to talk about today. We thank you, everybody, for listening. Please check out Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and follow us subscribe to us on YouTube. And we'll be back next week with the second half of the Eternals. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Goodbye.
Cheers, all.